Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about some NBA teams with the most on the line next year. We did this with some players the other day where we talked about some players that had a lot to prove or had a lot on the line for next year. And in this video, I wanted to kind of flip that around and talk about some teams. And there are a lot of teams that have a significant amount of things on the line for their franchise moving forward going into next season. So there's plenty to talk about in this video. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every single day. It's a great place for consistent NBA content. And you can also leave a like rating on the video as well. That helps me out because it gets the video out to more people on YouTube. And it tells me that you are actually enjoying the content. You can also hang out with me on Twitch outside of these videos at twitch.tv/spolo_TD. And you can also hang out with me in the Discord as well. Those are two great places to hang out with the community outside of these videos, outside of the comment section, if that's something that you are interested in. And with all those things said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm going to begin with what should probably be a relatively obvious one here, and it's the LA Clippers. And you could argue that this is the team that has the most on the line out of every single team in this list. And the reason for that is pretty clear. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George can both leave the franchise next offseason if they so choose. They are both possible 2021 NBA free agents. And given how this first season in LA went, it's not an unlikely event to consider that the Clippers would be losing those two players. But not just losing those two players. That's not all it is for the Clippers. It's not just losing two of the better players in the entire league. We can talk about Paul George's standing another time. But it's not just that. And it's also the fact that they basically don't have control over their draft picks moving forward either as a result of the Paul George trade that puts them in, if those two guys leave, the worst situation that the league has seen in a very, very long time. We can talk about how bad things were for Brooklyn. We can talk about how bad things were for a couple of different teams throughout NBA history. But the fact that it's the Clippers, the fact that they're losing two big-time players, the fact they don't really have anybody else on the roster, the fact they traded away Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and all these other picks, and then both those guys are going to leave, there's a lot going on for this Clippers team next year. I still think that they have plenty of talent. I've learned my lesson. I don't believe in the Clippers anymore, but I still think that from an overall perspective, if the jersey said something other than LA Clippers, this would be a team that would possibly be contending next season. The talent is certainly still there. They have moves that they need to make as it relates to whether it's Lou Williams or Montrezl Harrell. There are pieces on this roster that they definitely need to kind of adjust and figure out what works best for them. But specifically with Kawhi and Paul George, if those guys leave, it's going to be a tough one for LA. So they really, really need to have a successful year. Next up now is the Philadelphia 76ers. And honestly, you could have put them on this list last year as well. This is a team that continues to be one of the most dramatic in the entire league. There's always rumors floating around Philadelphia. There's always a ton of interest in what they're going to do with this roster. And now that they've got not necessarily a new front office, but they've got Daryl Morey there. They signed Elton Brand to an extension. They just signed Doc Rivers. And so you might think, okay, there's a little bit of stability here. All of these guys are signed to longer term deals. They should be sticking around for a couple of years. And that's probably true. But they've also, I've said this multiple times, they've adjusted all the pieces around Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid about as much as you can in a 3-year stretch. And if it still doesn't work this year, they need to start thinking about other solutions. And probably that involves a Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid trade. They have moved Josh Richardson to the team. They've moved Al Horford to the team. They brought in Tobias Harris. They had Jimmy Butler there. You go back to when they had Robert Covington and Dario Saric. And it's worked at certain points, but there's still just this awkwardness between those two players when they're on the court at the same time. And if they don't figure it out next year, I think this is the last year. I think that they go into this year thinking, we've got to figure this out. And if we don't, then we're going to have to change some things up. So there's a lot of things on the line for the future of the Sixers going into this upcoming season. Next up now is another relatively obvious one, and it's the Milwaukee Bucks. In a very similar situation to the Clippers. They don't have to give away so many first-round picks moving forward as the Clippers do. But still, Giannis Antetokounmpo can leave in 2021. And the Bucks, I don't want to say that they lucked out with Giannis because he's been an incredibly hard worker. They've done a great job of developing him. Kudos to them for drafting him. But he has been everything for their franchise over the last handful of seasons. And to lose that would be a huge step back for this team and losing out on a once-in-a-generation player for Milwaukee at least. There are players as good as Giannis that come to the league on occasion. But for a team like Milwaukee to have one of those players does not happen very often. And every single chance that they have to be a relevant NBA team for the next 10 years relies on Giannis re-signing with the Bucks and not leaving in 2021 free agency. And assuming that he does not sign a contract extension this offseason, which it doesn't appear that he's going to, then all next year, the rumors are going to be floating around about, could Giannis be traded? Is he going to leave in the offseason? Do they have enough? Can they actually make things happen in the postseason? And my confidence level is low. Like, I know that they were close 2 years ago. This past year, the Heat was just a really tough matchup for them. But specifically as it relates to their playoff performance, their postseason performance, I have my doubts. And some of that is about Giannis, but a lot of that is about a lack of playmaking on the roster outside of Giannis when he goes to the bench, when you're talking about Chris Middleton, when you're talking about Eric Bledsoe. And if they don't figure those things out, there are a lot of teams lining up in 2021 free agency that have pretty interesting cases to bring in Giannis, whether it's Toronto, whether it's Miami, whether it's a team like Dallas, if they still have the salary cap space at that moment. There's a lot of teams that are going to be able to, make a pretty good argument that they have a better situation long-term moving forward than what the Milwaukee Bucks have to offer. And quite frankly, the Bucks aren't exactly like a dazzling franchise to play for either. There are other teams around the league that are just simply more intriguing to play for if that's something that you're into as a player. I don't know if that's what Giannis is into, but the Bucks have to do something this year. Second to last now is my very own Brooklyn Nets, who we've talked about in a lot of videos lately, but that's because I think they're one of the more interesting teams going into this upcoming season, because as I've said in the past, like the level of variance between what this team could be record-wise at the top and at the bottom is pretty ridiculous. Like, I don't think it's a stretch to say that this team could win 50 games in the Eastern Conference. They've got the talent, they've got Kyrie Irving, they've got Kevin Durant, assuming those guys are healthy. But if those guys struggle to return from injury, then we could be looking at a 20-win team pretty easily. Like, there's a lot of variance here. And it's like, part of me wants to think that it's all going to come together, right? I mean, we've got Steve Nash, Kevin Durant, we've got Kyrie Irving. They're going to be able to figure it out. There's some other pieces on this roster: Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, DeAndre Jordan, if you want to call him a piece, Taurean Prince. But there's also a pretty good likelihood here that they just don't figure this out, that the pieces don't quite fit together, that they're trying to fit, something together that just doesn't work. And then that's going to necessitate trades. And then they have to actually get the trades right for it to make any sense. And then if it doesn't go well this year, like if this team struggles and guys are kind of healthy, they win like 45 games, they make it to the second round and lose, there's just going to be some doubts about whether they made the correct decisions to bring in Kyrie and KD, the sacrifices they made as it relates to D'Angelo Russell and kind of the path that this team was on before they brought in KD and Kyrie, the long-term expense of those two players if they're not going to be able to stay healthy. Those questions are going to start to be raised, and I think those questions will be raised with them more than any other team in the league, because you have free agency question marks, right? And you have roster question marks that we've talked about at this point with the Clippers and the Bucks and the Sixers. But from a long-term expense, is this going to work? Was this the right decision to bring these guys in type situation? I don't think there's any more dramatic situation in that respect than what the Brooklyn Nets have going into this upcoming season. So we will see. There's a lot to digest there for Brooklyn. I'm obviously hoping it goes well, but there's a lot hanging in the balance for this upcoming season. And the last up now is the Golden State Warriors. And you might think that it's strange that this is a team that's on this list, because they seem to be really, really well positioned. They've got a former championship core, a championship experienced core: Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Steph obviously being a former MVP. And they've got some other pieces on the roster as well, plus Andrew Wiggins and the number 2 pick in the draft. So you might be thinking, well, there really isn't anything on the line. This team just won 15 games or whatever. They'll be fine. You know what I mean? They'll win 45, 50 games. Could be one of the better teams in the Western Conference. And if not, then, that they weren't any good last year anyway. So here's the thing with that. They only really have a 2-year window here, in my opinion, in terms of actually having a legitimate chance at winning the title. When you look at their payroll stuff, when you look at the age of some of these players, depending on what they trade Wiggins in the second pick for, who they select with the second pick, assuming that they keep Wiggins and they just pick a guy with the second pick that turns into a pretty good player, but not an all-NBA caliber guy, their window is going to close pretty quickly. I mean, Draymond's getting old, Steph is getting old, Klay is getting old, and if they don't do it this year, they might start questioning if it's worth it to run it back next year, considering the cost of the roster. If they only win 45 games, they might look at this and think, man, we're paying a lot of money for a 45-win team. And like I said, I mean, they still have moves to be made here, right? They've got the future Minnesota pick. They've got the number 2 pick in this draft. They've got Andrew Wiggins. They've got movable pieces if they really want to make some kind of all-in move here and bridge the gap between this era of Warriors basketball and the next era. But I think that there's a lot more importance on this upcoming season for Golden State than people are really anticipating right now. I think a lot of people are just kind of treating it as a house money year, when really I think this is going to be a pretty big indicator of what kind of team they're going to be now moving forward, assuming that these guys stay healthy, which obviously was an issue for Steph last year. Klay was out the whole year. Draymond was in and out a little bit. But, I mean, if these guys don't look championship caliber, then there might be some decisions made in Golden State a lot quicker than we had anticipated. I'm not talking about trading away Steph, but more so just not really going for it all and kind of playing more for the future than you would expect for a team that has as good of players as they do. So it's possible that they win 45 games. It's possible they're one of the best teams in the West next year. Who knows? You never really know. The West is going to be crazy, crazy competitive, and I can't wait to see what it looks like. But there's a significant amount of stuff on the line for the Warriors next year as well. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.